Hey, before the video starts, I just wanted to say I have an Etsy store now. So far, all that's on it are these stickers based off the Animal Crossing Dreamy plushes, but I hope to have some more stuff on that soon. Okay, thank you, bye! Well, hi and hello. I'm Nick. This is my channel. And if my Hazbin Hotel knockoff looking ass didn't give it away, I am autistic. And also I like alternative fashion. So when I started getting into dolls in high school, you can probably guess which line in particular piqued my interest. Now, judging by the fact you clicked on this video, I'm going to assume everyone here is at least passingly familiar with Monster High, so I'm just going to speed run the cliff notes so we're all on the same page. Monster High is a fashion doll line released in 2010 by the company Mattel, the same people behind Barbie, Uno, and Hot Wheels. The line was supposed to appeal to the edgy, hot topic tween demographic who are aging out of the very PG Barbie but haven't given up on playing with dolls just yet. The line featured children of various monsters, cryptids, and legendary creatures, and they all dressed in various alternative or gothic styles to appeal to the children at the time. This also made them very popular with adult collectors, as there was nothing really like them on the market outside of one-off Halloween releases. While the line was a massive financial success, after a couple major blows to the company, such as Mattel losing the right to the Disney Princess line, and concerns from parents that Monster High was too scary and I am not joking, too sexy, apparently, in 2018, Mattel decided to reboot the line, making the line cheaper and more child-friendly in an attempt to appeal to the concerned parents, as well as make back the money they lost from the Disney princesses. Believe it or not, when you're shilling out garbage like this, people aren't exactly going to be too interested. And to no one's surprise, after the reboot, Monster High eventually fizzled out and stopped production shortly after. That was until 2022, in which a new generation of Monster High was released to mixed reception. Now, outside of the obvious Generation 1 purists or the people mad that they dared to make a fat lady into a doll, a general well-constructed argument against this generation is the fact that they removed a lot of the gothic elements that made the original line so special. If you look at this screenshot from the show that aired on Nickelodeon, you can see what I mean. None of these outfits are particularly gothic or alternative outside of maybe Draculaura's. This all just looks like stuff middle schoolers would wear. Now, this isn't me saying I straight up hate Generation 3. I actually really like a bunch of the designs. But it does leave a pretty bad taste in my mouth when these leaked prototypes revealed that the line was meant to be a lot more gothic like the original was. This was definitely a choice by the higher-ups, similar to the change in target demographic Generation 2 had, because this isn't even the first time they've been caught censoring things for the sake of marketability. Most infamously, Clawdeen's younger sister Howleen had her hair changed from naturally curly and orange to straightened down in pink for the sake of being more feminine and marketable. Yes, the brand that claims to love diversity and inclusion passive-aggressively said that black women wearing their hair naturally are not feminine enough. Gross, Mattel. So to reiterate, Monster High, an almost 15-year-old doll brand with a theme of diversity and gothic styles, who has had 3 generations to get this right, has a generation that is gothic but not diverse, a generation that's pretty diverse but in no way gothic, and Generation 2. Need I specify? And as a fan of this franchise, it irritates me to no end that we still have not gotten the doll line we were promised. And then I remembered, hey, I'm an artist, and a pretty decent writer at that. Why don't I take a crack at redesigning Monster High? I mean, that is why you're here, isn't it? Sorry it took me 3.5 minutes to get to the actual drawing. There's a lot of ground to cover. Starting off with the pretty pink princess herself, Draculaura. Going into this redesign, I think I had the strongest idea of what I wanted to do with Draculaura because her design varies the least out of everyone. To the point, I don't really have a favorite Draculaura out of G1 or G3. I like different aspects of them, like the fashion of G1, but the general character design of G3, so I kind of just merged the two together for my design. I prefer G3's split dye, and I also like how the hat adds some sort of sun protection into her actual design, but I gave her the pigtails of Generation 1 for the sake of a better silhouette. Her outfit is basically identical to Generation 1, just with a bunch of spider web motifs added from Generation 3's design, plus some alterations to the outfit to better fit her new plus-size body type. I remember when Generation 3 Draculaura was revealed, some people said she was plus-sized, other people said she was only a little curvy, so I decided to give her a more catty noir body type just for the sake of ending the argument. Another thing I'm bringing back from G3 is the fact that she's half Thai, but her mom isn't in the picture anymore, so she doesn't have a strong connection to that Thai heritage, which ironically enough would make it more prevalent in the story as she tries to find that part of herself. And on the topic of her mom not being in the picture anymore,
I think it's time I mention a little lore that I came up with for this redesign. So in this version of Monster High, the monster and human worlds are interconnected via various portals across both of them. In this version, the monsters and humans don't have any sort of rivalry. They actually have a very pleasant relationship with each other. When you go through the portal in the human world's version of Mexico, you'd end up in the monster version of Hexaco. So the cultures were pretty similar, so they got along really well. That was until about 1600 years ago, when every single portal in both worlds mysteriously closed, trapping everyone in whatever world they ended up in, including Draculaura's mother, who was on the human side of the portal when they closed. After basically becoming a widow and also becoming a single father to an infant, Dracula became a total helicopter father. And I'm now just realizing that's the plot of Hotel Transylvania, but who cares, it's a decent enough movie. But unlike that movie, his worries are more rational, to say the least. Draculaura has a blood intolerance, which means that not only is she physically and mentally underdeveloped, but her vampire powers are also incredibly underdeveloped, which makes Dracula incredibly scared what happens when she becomes an adult and has to face the world on her own. These worries are multiplied tenfold when you take into consideration Dracula is the only person who knows Draculaura is half human. Yes, I'm basically stealing Clawdeen's plot from G3, but that wasn't well written anyways. Her mom was a human witch, and that mixed with the fact that the portals closed right after Draculaura's birth, you can probably put together her mom was the one who closed the portals. Nobody but Dracula knows this, and not even Dracula fully knows why. The one thing Dracula does know is now that Draculaura is 1600, her magical powers will start coming in. And because he doesn't have them, he doesn't know how to properly teach her how to use them. So, despite his worries, he ships her off to Monster High, an elite boarding school that he helped found, meaning that the magic teachers there can teach Draculaura how to be a proper witch, and he can still keep an eye on her. As far as Draculaura knows, though, this is just a 1600 birthday present. She has no clue her mom's a human, she has no clue she's a human, and she has no clue in a couple months she'll start casting magic spells she doesn't know how to fully control. She's more worried about the fact that she's never made a single friend her age. Or any friend equivalent to her age, I guess. I imagine her to be kind of like Charlie from Hazbin Hotel or Luz from the Owl House. She's super perky and happy, but also socially inept. She also sings a lot, because of course it's a musical. She starts off as a sophomore, which means she's the new girl in school, in a class where everyone already knows each other. This is my best way of implementing the new kid in school idea that G3 Clawdeen and G1 Frankie had, without having her jump in halfway through the school year like those two did. Thankfully for her, she has two awesome roommates who take her under their wing. You can probably guess who they are. And here we have my version of Draculaura. I decided to make her the new main character just because she has the most marketable design, which meant I'd probably be allowed to do a little more with her character. G1 Frankie and G3 Clawdeen are boring as hell, so I wanted to do something original. Plus, I really like the idea of her being half human and that's why she can do magic, and that just seemed more like a main character thing. I also wanted to give all their pets a little more plot relevance, so Count Fabulous in this version is Draculaura's voice of reason. She never listens to him, but he's still there. I like to imagine Dracula had him follow her to Monster High just to keep an eye on her. But with all that said and done, let's move on to my favorite electric little Franken monster. We're now moving on to Frankie Stein, my personal favorite of the Ghoul Squad. For no particular reason. Wait, didn't I make this exact same joke in the last video? Despite them being my favorite, Frankie is the character that had the biggest outfit change, mostly for the sake of self-indulgence, honestly. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but the reason Generation 3 Frankie has blue skin, no neck bolts, and no lightning bolt streaks in their hair is because of a copyright issue with Universal. Universal owns the copyright to the iconic green Frankenstein and all the traits that come along with him, and while G1 and G2 Frankie had access to those traits, G3 does not. For that reason, I decided to design mine royalty-free since that's what the most recent Frankie did, but I wouldn't be against getting the green skin and neck bolts back. So instead, I included the alternatives they added in G3, replacing the lightning bolt streaks in their hair with lightning bolt hair clips, and moving the bolts from their neck to their prosthetic leg. Frankly, most of this design is based off G3. That's just the version of Frankie I find more interesting because they actually have a personality. But for you G1 purists, I did my best to make the outfit a little reminiscent of G1. I kept the electric neon color scheme from G3, but I also changed the outfit to be a much darker blue so that the electric colors don't blend in with the rest of the outfit. I gave them one thigh-high conver and a normal-sized conver on their prosthetic leg, because fun fact, when you're wearing a prosthetic, you can't wear long shoes covering it because it makes accessing any mechanical bits difficult. They actually incorporate this into a couple of G3 Frankie's dolls, but I wanted to incorporate it into my version of Frankie's main outfit. Plus, it helps with the asymmetrical theming they have going on. As for their lore, I actually rewrote Frankie's backstory a lot. Again, this is my favorite character, so I got a little self-indulgent. In Generation 1, Frankie was the daughter of Frankenstein's monster. In Generation 3, Frankie is the child of Dr. Frankenstein. In my version, Frankie is the great-great-great-great-grandchild of the original Dr. Frankenstein, with their mother being a human who is a direct descendant of him. And that would make their great-uncle Frankenstein's monster, who is still very much alive on account of being, undead. Creating monsters is a Frankenstein family tradition, and Frankie was their mom's attempt at it. I say attempt because in her ambition, she didn't exactly make Frankie perfectly. Their stitching has a tendency to come undone, their brain doesn't really work perfectly, their body rejected one of their legs, hence why they have a prosthetic. To clarify, their mom doesn't hate them for this or resent them for this in any way. In fact, it's quite the opposite actually. Other members of the scientific community mock their mother for the way Frankie came out. Their mom is a Monster High alumni and sent Frankie there in an attempt to be in a more nurturing environment as Frankie gets a handle on being alive. In my version, instead of being 16 days old, they're 16 months old and had their freshman year with everyone else, which is why they're not a new kid, but Draculaura is. They are definitely autism-coded, again, very self-indulgent, and have a tendency to be a bit much. This scares most people off, minus their roommate Clawdeen, but they don't really care. Or notice. They're not really great at the whole social thing. But what they lack in street smarts, they have in book smarts. Bring up anything about biology or mechanical engineering and Frankie will go on a tangent for hours. I like to imagine that they dress themselves, but don't really understand a concept of color theory or symmetry, so they just put on whatever they think looks cool. They're just like me for real. And here we have the living neon sign themselves. Now, do I need G4 Frankie to be non-binary? Not really. But this is my video, so I get to do what I want. And on that note, Frankie does not date Cleo in my version. Just getting that out of the way. I do like Frankie and Cleo together in G3, but my Cleo is going to be more of the original mean girl vibe we had in G1, and that didn't seem like someone Frankie would date. I do have another girlfriend in mind for Frankie, but we'll have to see if I make a sequel video to get around to her. But speaking of lesbians, God, what a transition. There's a certain werewolf I want you all to meet. Now, I am far from the first person to say this, and I sure as hell won't be the last person to say this, but Generation 3 Clawdeen had one of the worst design downgrades in the entire reboot. Her show version, anyways. Her dolls are actually pretty nice. That being said, my version's basically just going back to G1 Clawdeen. I swapped out her skirt for a pair of baggy ripped jeans just so all three members of the main trio wouldn't be wearing skirts. I also gave her some more werewolf features since I didn't like how in G1 all she had was the ears. I gave her a more wolf-like nose, a tail, and a lot of exposed fur. I imagine that werewolves like to have a lot of their skin exposed so that the fur isn't getting tangled up in a lot of the fabric. So alongside her ripped and baggy pants, I gave her some slits on her jacket sleeves, which she already wears rolled up, alongside a tiger-striped crop top. I know that G1 Clawdeen's preferences towards things like leopard and tiger stripes don't make a whole lot of sense since she's a dog, but considering in my version she ends up with Corla like she does at the end of G1, I figured it was a fun bit of foreshadowing. And that's really all I have to say about the design. Like I said, I didn't really change much from G1, so now we can move on to her story, which also didn't change much from G1. My version of Clawdeen comes from a big family. A pack, if you will. She's not specifically the middle child, but they have enough kids that she's basically a middle child. The whole reason she begged her parents to let her attend Monster High in the first place was so she could make a name for herself separate from her family, because she also comes from a very influential family. Her mother Celine is a very prominent political figure in the werewolf world, and her older sister Claudia is also a famous actress. Back home, where most of her peers are werewolves, that's all they really care about. But in Monster High, there's so many other monsters, no one really cares that her family is so famous. It helps that her best friends and roommates are Draculaura and Frankie, who are both from famous families themselves and know nothing about werewolf culture. They really couldn't care that Clawdeen's family is so famous. She also helps the two dress, considering that Frankie dresses like a toddler and Draculaura dresses like a grandma. I'm going the route My Little Pony and Winx Club went, where the fashionista character isn't just obsessed with fashion, they also want to become a fashion designer. I actually imagine that Clawdeen customized her outfit herself to add all those patches where her fur can poke through, because she just got so irritated with it getting caught in the fabric before. Between Draculaura, Frankie, and her, Clawdeen is definitely the voice of reason most of the time, but when she's not the voice of reason, they also get into the most trouble. And aside from that, there really isn't any more I can say about her. Like I said, I basically just brought G1 Clawdeen back. There isn't much to say besides that. And here we have the Queen of the Furries. Don't cancel me for that. I turned her pet Crescent back into a cat because I didn't like that in G3 they changed Crescent to be a wolf. And like I mentioned back when I was discussing the outfit, Clawdeen's tiger stripe crop top is a reference to the fact that her and Tourline will eventually get together. Currently their moms are rivals, so the two of them can't stand each other, but obviously as Tourline goes through her redemption arc, she and Clawdeen will eventually get together. It's basically just Diet Lumity from the Owl House. I might get crucified for saying this, but screw it, it's my truth. Cleo's G3 design is objectively better than G1, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Okay, that was a wee bit dramatic, but I do stand by the fact that G3 is the better design. In doll form anyways, she had like one of the worst downgrades in the show. G1 Cleo kinda just looks like a girl. The natural skin tone, natural hair color, and the fact that her bandages are part of her outfit instead of her body makes it super difficult to recognize that she's a monster. This kind of exists in G3, but the fact that the bandages are molded onto Cleo's body and she has blue hair instead kind of helps her fit in with everyone a little more. Now, an issue I came across when I was designing my Cleo's outfit is the fact that Cleo's fashion isn't super gothic or alternative. And her outfits aren't even that detailed either. A majority of her style comes from her heavy use of makeup and jewelry. I kinda just bit the bullet and decided that since Cleo's meant to be more of a popular girl, she's wearing more trendy fashion instead of gothic fashion. I heavily utilized sharp ends and triangles in her shape language, namely in her ponytail, which is inspired by how Nephra's ponytail was stylized in the Nickelodeon show. I tried to avoid covering her dress in straight-up hieroglyphics, so instead I used a lot of angular patterns. And aside from her jacket, I tried to avoid any bandage patterns because it doesn't really make sense for her to be wearing them as an outfit when the bandages are part of her body. I made her outfit primarily blue with some tan so that the gold from all of her jewelry would stand out against it more. Outside of Draculaura, Cleo probably had the biggest story change in my version. She was still born in ancient Egypt and is still part of the Egyptian royal family, only how she became a mummy is very different. Both of her parents are very vain, as to be expected, so when given the chance to use enchanted bandages to become immortal, they took it, and dragged both their daughters along with them. Cleo, her parents, and her older sister Nephra all used the magical bandages to become immortal, at the cost of needing to go to sleep for 5,000 years. Originally, they thought by the time they woke up, they could go back to Egypt. The problem is that when they woke up, the portals back to the human world had closed. Thankfully, they had stored a bunch of their treasure with them in the monster world, but they don't have their royal status here, so they need to start from scratch. They've only been awake for a couple of years, hence why Cleo and Nephra are still teenagers, but in that time, they become very, how do I word this, notorious in the monster world?
in the sense that the Kardashians are notorious. They're basically just the Kardashians. This is obviously not great for Cleo and Nephra's development. Their sisterly rivalry is entirely based off their parents' approval, and they both put on an air of arrogance and superiority that pisses everyone around them off. In the public eye, and in their parents' eyes, Nephra is the favorite. She's older, which means she gets to developmental milestones first, which means by the time Cleo gets there, all the public sees is her trying to be Nephra. This is the reason Ghoulia is Cleo's only friend. Ghoulia could not give a rat's ass about Cleo's fame, her fortune, anything like that, which means Cleo's able to tear her walls down around Ghoulia and be herself. She's a much nicer person when she's not trying to get everyone's approval. And believe it or not, she can't stand social media. As a public figure, she's very familiar with the cesspool that is the comment section. So outside of brand partnerships or anything her parents make her post, she is never on social media. That's kind of my twist on the whole shoot-in influencer trope every kid's show needs to have. Cleo is very familiar with social media and can give good social media related lessons, but she herself is not obsessed with it. Quite the opposite, actually. And here's my take on the Golden Girlie. Going in, my plan was to basically take G3 Cleo's design and G1 Cleo's personality and mesh them together. I think I did a decent enough job. And despite not being with Frank, and despite not getting together and despite the fact Cleo and Frankie aren't dating in my version, Cleo and Deuce aren't either. Like in G3, my version of Deuce would be Arrow Ace, but that doesn't entirely mean I want Cleo to stay single. But unlike Frankie, I don't have an alternate significant other for her, so comment down below who you think she should get together with. Now, Lagoona was an interesting character because she doesn't really have any character. In Generation 1, at the very least, she was very underutilized, to the point that in Generation 3, she had a massive design and personality overhaul, to the point she's a completely different character. We'll get to that. I kind of just ran with the fact that her outfit screams that she's more tomboyish and athletic, so I made her more tomboyish and athletic. That sounds underwhelming, but it's not like I was working with much. I changed her hair to fishtail braids for relatively obvious reasons, but also that her silhouette was more distinct from everyone else's. And I dressed her up like she was ready to annihilate you in volleyball at any given time. I gave her blue skin back, but I brought along the faded legs from Generation 3, only this time the fade is pink and the main body is blue. On a similar note, I changed her eyes and the highlights in her hair to pink instead of blue for the sake of more color variety. I replaced the flower in her hair with a visor, not only to make her look more sporty, but also because my version of Lagoona wouldn't be caught dead in a flower. I replaced her pearl necklace with a shark tooth one to give her that classic Australian vibe, and I replaced her purse with a volleyball. Because sports. I gave her Generation 3's more feisty personality, but significantly less sanitized, so she's more of a brute than just a silly little gal. And my version is now half Australian and half Latina, which in monster terms means she's half sea monster and half lake monster. Yes, I'm going the generic route. I'm moving Lagoona and Gil's biracial relationship conflict a generation up. Lagoona's mom is a sea monster from the Great Scarier Reef off the coast of Australia, and her dad is a lake monster from Honduras. Lagoona's mom was out exploring and washed ashore on Honduras one day where she fell in love with her dad. But due to the racial divide between fresh and sea monsters, neither of them were really accepted by the other's family and they were both disowned. So she grew up in a mangrove village with a bunch of other monsters, but isn't really strongly attached to either side of her culture. She looks significantly more like her mom, so she tries to pass as a full-blooded sea monster due to the whole racial conflict between lake and sea monsters. But she inherited a lot of lake monster quirks from her dad, which means that she's constantly in situations where she's almost caught. Not to mention, she speaks with an Australian accent, but will randomly spout out Spanish when she gets excited. Obviously, pretending she's not related to her dad causes a rift between the two, but he can't exactly blame her considering he's also experienced racism, and he's not even a hybrid.
She's super sporty and especially loves water sports like diving, swimming, surfing, stuff like that. The issue is that she's more equipped to swim in fresh water instead of salt water, so she can't exactly compete in water sports without telling people she's a hybrid. The whole reason her parents sent her to Monster High in the first place was so she could be in a much more accepting environment that didn't shame her for who she was. But the shame from her home worked. She hasn't told anyone at Monster High she's a hybrid. Except for one person, but we'll get to that. And here we have the Butch Butcher. I feel so much shame, but I regret nothing. Because I moved the interracial relationship conflict to her parents instead of with her, she and Gil don't get together in this version. In fact, she doesn't end up with anyone. I really like how back in Generation 1, Clawdeen never got a boyfriend, not because she was originally intended to be a lesbian, but just to contrast the fact that everyone else had a significant other. So since my version of Clawdeen has a girlfriend, I decided to move that idea over to Lagoona. And now that we're done with that, it's time we move on to our next girl, who might be a little familiar. Now, this is by no means an original idea. I've seen countless artists imagining if G3 Lagoona was her own original character. But the thing is, I've never done it, which means this is original. So allow me to introduce you to Corla Reeve, Lagoona's fraternal twin sister. I wanted their fashion styles to be nearly opposite despite the fact they both have a CMYK color scheme. So whereas Lagoona is built more for volleyball, Corla is built more for a nice day on the beach. Her sister has a lot more sharp edges in her shape language, so I gave Corla a lot more round edges with her bouncy hair and the rounded fins. Lagoona has always been the worst selling doll for some reason, so I figured having a pair of twins with opposite personalities and opposite fashion styles being sold together would probably help with sales. You've probably already guessed by now, but just like how Lagoona looks more like a sea monster but has a bunch of lake monster quirks that get her almost caught, Corla looks more like a lake monster, tries to pretend to be a lake monster, but her sea monster quirks almost get her caught. And just like how Lagoona has a strained relationship with their dad because they pretend they're not related, Corla has a strained relationship with their mom because they pretend they're not related. You'd assume the twins would get along pretty well considering they're the only other hybrid they have to relate to, but these girls are constantly fighting. I mean, like, one of them walks into the room and the other one sets the house on fire kind of fighting. They don't necessarily hate each other or resent each other for being a reminder of the problems they face. It's just as simple as that they have nothing in common. In fact, if you dare say anything bad about their sister in front of them, they will rip your throat out. Just like how Lagoona was made more tomboyish to contrast with everyone, Corla is the most traditionally girly and feminine. She's boy-obsessed, she loves social media, she's a little ditzy, that kind of character. I wanted the twins to look related, but not related enough that you'd be able to tell they're twins just by looking at them, because they're still pretending to just be complete strangers to each other. So I swapped the blue and pink on each of their designs. Lagoona is blue with pink fins, pink fades, pink highlights in her hair, pink eyes, stuff like that, and then vice versa for Corla. And just like how Lagoona can't partake in water sports without outing herself as a hybrid, Corla is constantly running into situations where she almost outs herself because she needs a constant salt intake because of her sea monster side. Without it, she shows a lot of symptoms similar to that you'd expect from someone with a chronic illness. And before you ask, no, Corla doesn't get with Gil either. I have a different direction I'd like to take his character if I ever make a sequel video. And plus I like the idea of Corla being like Frankie from G1, where she's bouncing between a bunch of different possible love interests. She's also the character who I designed to look the most like a G3 character, with that very neon, TikTok-y middle schooler aesthetic. Only with a hint of the gothic nature and also some aspects of G1 Lagoona just so the sisters look kind of like a pair. And here's the final design for my first ever Monster High OC. If you don't count redesigns as OCs, I guess. And before we move on to the last character, I wanted to quickly address some concerns people had over G3 Lagoona and the representation of Latino women.
The main concern being that Lagoona's feisty behavior and ditzy attitude were kind of stereotypical spicy Latina traits. But from what I've seen online, a lot of Latino fans say that once Lagoona became her own character and not just the tropes we see in early episodes, things were fine. So imagine that kind of writing style with this Lagoona if you were concerned about that. But with that disclaimer out of the way, let's move on to the one, the only, our queen, Madame Ghoulia Yelps. Now, like a lot of neurodivergent people, I relate to Ghoulia Yelps on a spiritual level, which makes it so sad that she wasn't in Generation 3. She also notably wasn't in Generation 2, so unlike the rest of the characters, I only had one design to go off of. And despite her being one of my favorites, the fact that her scene aesthetic is so specifically 2010, it also meant I had the hardest time modernizing her. My workaround for this is that I decided that Ghoulia was a scene kid when she was alive back in the early 2000s, died in her teens, and was only recently resurrected, and now just has to make do with whatever modern fashion she can find that still fits her aesthetic. Basically, she died wearing her G1 outfit, and in the modern day has to try and recreate it, which is why my Ghoulia is pretty much just wearing an alternate version of her G1 clothes. Speaking of Ghoulia being dead, I wanted to emphasize the fact she was a corpse, as much as I like G1's design, it doesn't communicate the fact she's a zombie super well. So I gave my Ghoulia a lot of exposed bones and sagging skin. I also gave her a lazy eye to try and imply that it's slowly rotting and slowly sliding out of place. My Ghoulia is also canonically autistic. I know that G3 Ghoulia being able to talk isn't technically disability erasure, but I think the Ghoulia being neurodivergent or at least non-verbal headcanon was so prevalent already it makes no sense that they got rid of it. So I brought it back, because I can do what I want. She also struggles to walk because her body's gone through 10 years of rotting, so she uses a lot of mobility aids. I just didn't draw those because I'm bad at drawing those. I swapped out her headband for a studded beanie because, as much as I hate G3 Ghoulia, I have to admit making her a skater was kind of a cool idea. I couldn't really find a place to add cherries to her design. Maybe it's because I was only like 5 during the scene era, but I don't really get why her design had cherries on it to begin with. If you happen to know where that came from, please comment down below. I just threw on some cherry earrings and added some green to her design where I really shouldn't have added green. Maybe it's just because I like Ghoulia so much, but this design is personally the one I feel the most disappointed by. I don't hate it, and if it didn't have all the unnecessary green to it, I'd probably like it a lot more. I think I just wanted her to look a little too much like G1 Ghoulia. As for her lore, Ghoulia was born a human named Julia, who unfortunately passed away in a car crash with her parents about 10-15-ish years ago. Until relatively recently, she was living with them in the spirit world, until she's suddenly raised from the dead for no clear reason. She's currently living with a host family on a sort of exchange student program as she tries to figure out how to pass back on to the spirit world to be with her parents, but currently speaking, she's stuck there. She's super blunt and not particularly social, which, ironically enough, helps her make her only friend in Cleo. Cleo likes how straightforward and honest Ghoulia is, and Ghoulia likes how much Cleo helps her get used to the modern world. Help Ghoulia desperately needs, because Lord save us, Ghoulia cannot figure out how to use modern technology. And here we have everyone's favorite final girl. I thought it would be cute that since Monster High would 100% be super disabled friendly, they gave Ghoulia Sir Hootslot as a service owl to help with the fact that her joints don't tend to agree with her. He also calms her down when she's having autistic meltdowns. God, do my parents wish they had that when I was younger. I added the disability coding because I like how it characterizes the rest of the main group as super accepting of Ghoulia, even though she can't move or communicate or do a lot of the things that the rest of them can do, but they still include her because she's awesome. And here we have my take on everyone's favorite ghouls. I know some people might be upset they're not straight up gothic the way they were in G1, but you have to remember that alternative fashion is about counterculture and individuality, so it will evolve as long as mainstream styles evolve. The edgy tweens who were playing with Monster High back in the early 2000s grew up with these gaudy Disney Channel outfits, so they were more attracted to the gothic and mature styles Monster High offered. Nowadays, tweens are surrounded by minimalism and sad beige moms, so alternative kids are more attracted to maximalism and bright colors. Which is why all my designs are so super saturated and make sure the character's signature color is front and center. Now tell me in the comments down below, if you could buy one of these characters as a doll, who would it be? Personally, I'd buy Frankie, but as I've mentioned several times now, I designed them specifically to be everything I love in a character design. But Cleo or one of the twins are a close second to fourth. Thank you so much for watching this video, especially those of you who came here from the last one. I know it's a weird transition going from Pokemon to dolls, but I didn't want to become one of those channels that gets stuck doing one thing. This video was also supposed to come out way sooner, but of course, for the second time in a row, I got sick and had to take a break from recording. But there's no way in hell that happens 3 times in a row, right? Right? But with all that being said, I've been Nick the Clown, you've been watching my channel, and please remember, don't die.